deep coding style exercise. What it talks about, though, is more about the tools and technologies within the platform itself, largely based on SharePoint, by the way. So what we're going to do is talk about SharePoint for internet sites. The FIS part there is for internet sites. So you can take an ordinary SharePoint server, use it on the internet, and suddenly it's for internet sites. It's a different, same product, slightly different sales point and all those sorts of things, but otherwise it's virtually identical. And the second one is a new product called Fast Search for internet sites. So FSIS is based on the old Fast Search that some of you might have heard of from 2 or 3 years ago. Microsoft bought it for about $1.2 billion. And the last thing we'll talk about is the personalization accelerator. So here's where we started with on the left-hand side. Basically, quite a while ago, and we're talking when the internet was small and young, essentially people had static websites. So you had HTML, that was pretty much it. You had a server, it had flat HTML files on it, like .html files that look a little like text files with angle bracket tags. And when they talked about marketing in that context, they talked about trying to take a brand like Coke or something along those lines, craft.com, and creating websites that looked a lot like their PDF brochures, in other words, the printed brochures that they had. They were also managed centrally by IT. So the snag there was that IT would come along, and if you wanted to make a change to any of this text, because it was all versioned and managed and maybe even in CVS or something like that, you'd have to go to talk to the IT guys, and that would take a while. So if I wanted to make a small wording change onto a document, I'd have to identify the document, email IT, wait for them to make the change for me, and then eventually give me the change back and say, is this what you actually wanted? And when I say, yes, this is what I wanted, they'll actually deploy that out to the server itself. So primarily things were very static. They looked a lot like a brochure. Today, however, a lot of things have changed. So the two things. One is there's a lot of internal data inside organizations. So if you think about it, banks over the last few years, the last probably maybe 5 to 10 years, have started to open up some of their internal data inside the organization and given you access to that. So originally you had just this brochureware. Now there's data that starts to come out onto the internet site itself. So you need to be able to surface that data somehow. You need to be able to visualize it. So in other words, the marketing dollars now go from two things. Now go from the sort of PDF static style to a much more interesting style. Has anybody not seen a Surface machine? So a Microsoft Surface Box? Hands up if you haven't seen one. Right, okay, that's a few. I'll very brief description then. A Surface Box is basically a table where there's a screen projected up, and anybody can touch the table, and you can do things that you would find natural. So in other words, if there's an image on there, I can pick it up and I can slide it and push it away. You can't do that with an ordinary window. And when I say slide it away, it has gravity. It feels like it's a picture that was sort of sliding on air. So that's a Microsoft Surface machine. I was at TechEd in Australia last week, and what I found was that everybody would cluster around these Surface machines. They thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, and they wouldn't look at things like unified comms, SharePoint, BI, any of those sorts of things. They were really interested in the Surface machine. Why? Not because it had anything interesting on it. It had really useless games. It had slide pictures around, but because it was new and interesting. That's what happens here. Marketing are looking for new and interesting things. If I say the words, I'm on a horse, I'm guessing there's a bunch of you out here that know what I'm talking about. There's an ad in the States where the sort of punchline right at the end is, I'm on a horse. That was a new and interesting ad. In the same way, people are trying to build these new and interesting websites. That's where everybody wants to head. If you have a brand of any sort, so if you're Coke, you really want an interesting website because that's all you're selling. You own a brand. Sure, there's a drink behind it, but really you own a brand. But if you're any organization, even the tax office, for example, you want to have a brand. You want to make it interesting for people to use it because that deflects calls away from call centers. And more people that don't call call centers, the better off you are because call centers cost money. It's really that simple. Plus, if people fill out forms the wrong way, that costs money as well. So everything about finding information or misusing information is really important. It's really important to be able to find and use the information that you need. So this is our vision for the future. On the left-hand side, we believe you've got a whole series of tools internally within your organization. Advertising solutions, internet site solutions, in other words, internet sites that manage your internet presence, web infrastructures, servers, design tools, etc. We believe there's a whole series of those that potentially you have, but they're not unified in any way. This is our vision on the right-hand side here. And apologies for the fact that it's not circular. It's a 16:9 screen, originally designed for a 4:3 sort of normal screen. So it looks a bit wide. But in essence, what you've got is things like web content. So web content you can manage through SharePoint. You can create workflows in SharePoint. You can design and edit the content. You can version the content. You can have it published properly in SharePoint. Search, I'll come to that in a moment, but basically Microsoft spent a lot of money basically trying to get search right, and they've done a very good job of adapting our old fast search product into this new search domain, because about 25 to 30% of people will end up trying to navigate through a website, and then they'll go, oh, this is just too hard. I'll just type in a search. And if the search works, they'll keep using it. So that's up to a third of all of your users will try and use search at some point. And if it doesn't work, they'll give up or they'll call the call center. So again, search is critical. Digital asset management, commerce analytics, social and web 2.0 style functionality, the whole thing built into a nice, easy to use, unified experience. In other words, it should look like all of the other products that you have and all of the other products that people are used to using. In other words, it should have a toolbar, a ribbon, those sorts of things. So this is what people are looking for nowadays. They're looking for and this is pretty much anybody. As I said, I mentioned the Surface machine, which it's a pity there's not one here, but people are interested in new and vibrant things. So that's what you have to be thinking in terms of creating a website to do. Taking all of your internal information inside an organization and making it something like this that a person's going to be interested in using, something that connects with their friends. Maybe less relevant to things like a tax website, but certainly for a real estate website or something like that, other people that are living near me, those sorts of things. It still actually makes a lot of sense for a series of these things across a number of businesses. So the technology's got to change in here. So in the internet site solution space, essentially these are the sorts of workloads you've got. Web content management, site search, e-commerce, social computing, digital asset management. By digital asset management, I'm talking about things like pictures, videos, those sorts of things. So Microsoft sells products, and I'm just going to run through these products fairly briefly. On the left-hand side, you've got SharePoint FIS, SharePoint for Internet sites, which is standard. It's a single domain server for Internet sites. So in other words, if I have abc.com, that's all I can do. I can't do abc and xyz.com. That's one of the key differentiators between SharePoint FIS Standard and SharePoint FIS or FIS Enterprise. It's got multiple domain support, and it has a whole series of other things that are essentially key things that people want us to be able to see. Things like business intelligence, form services, system center support. All of those sort of enterprise-grade tooling are all available in the enterprise version of SharePoint FIS-E. And lastly, you've got FAST. The top box there, Fast ESP 5.3, in essence, that bit, that's what Microsoft spent $1.2 billion on about 2 or 3 years ago for 700 people, a bunch of code in a box, and a really good search engine. And at the time, we were the best-rated search engine on the planet. And now, Microsoft is the best-rated search engine on the planet. We're talking Gartner here. They added into that the sort of Microsoft style to it. So in other words, there's a designer. And the designer is in Visual Studio. So it's the fast search for internet sites designer, which I'll come to in a little while. Interaction management services and content transformation services. Again, I'll just touch on those for a second. Interaction management is where if I go to a website and I type in special offers, I would expect to see special offers. If I go to the same website and I type in digital cameras, I'm going to expect to see a list of digital cameras. But there's a vast difference in the types of information I'm going to expect back. In the special offers one, I'm not expecting a sort of a list that you'd get out of Bing or Yahoo or something like that. I'm going to expect sort of a series of little boxes that are talking about the big special offers that they've got. If, on the other hand, I've typed in digital cameras or a specific model number of a camera, I really want a list of all of the cameras and the prices of those. Interaction management services is able to do that. Content transformation is a little bit different. If I take content from an external website or even internally, I may need to be able to process that. So I need to look at some text, for example, of a blog website and see that, yes, this is talking about a specific camera model, so I can link that to the camera model I have in my database. And again, I'll come to that in a minute. And then you have languages and connectors in here as well. So, but those are the key 3 new things which we've added into essentially make search a lot easier to use. However, customers expect solutions. So in other words, customers fall into one of these broad categories. They're either a media company. So someone like Stuff, for example, that'd be a media company. That search is actually fairly key to what they do. Commerce, Marketing, they're trying to showcase a brand, things like craft.com. Customer service, tax would be a classic example of that. They're trying to serve their customers to keep them away from counters and call-in centres. And then you've got extranets. So there's a couple of spook intelligence agencies in Australia that want to be able to share some of their data out to other intelligence agencies overseas. They want an extranet. So the big question is, how do we align the products that we have with the solutions that people are after? And I'm going to run through these fairly briefly. So in the media and commerce space, so the larger sites where search is key, for example, it's FSIS. Top-tier traffic, top-tier websites. They have a lot of commerce-related activities, and because of that, any small increase in the capability is going to drive their bottom line. And that's the sort of place where you want to be able to use the best product that we have for search, which is FSIS. And this will be fairly brief, so apologies for the speed of some of these slides. In terms of marketing, FIS or FIS-E, depending on the size of the organisation. So we're talking about Deloitte, Ziploc, Bristol Myers Squibb, Nissan. They're trying to talk about brands primarily and marketing. Customer service. So Cisco.com use us. They've got a very good mobile search, by the way, as well. And that's one of the other things that's not that visible. Is a lot of people now are after search that works on a phone. It's not as easy as it might seem, because a lot of phones don't have browsers, and you can still search on the older one via WAP. And we can do that sort of thing by FSIS as well. So FIS-E, customer service, because it's potentially going to be multiple domains, and the likelihood is they're going to want BI services and business data. Extranet, forms-based workflows, surface the line of business data. As I said, with intelligence, that's the sort of thing they're definitely going to want to do. They've potentially got a large content volume. They've got a lot of data for intelligence, as you can imagine. And by intelligence agencies, I'm talking about the equivalent of the CIA, those sorts of people. Okay. So that's covered off very briefly on the sorts of, and really those slides are there for you to download at a later date and go through and say, okay, well, this is my domain. Here's where I want to be. Here's the types of product I should be using. So with SharePoint for Internet sites, in essence, this is the SharePoint wheel, which I'm imagining that pretty much everybody's seen to some degree. So you've got composite sites, communities, content, search, etc. In essence, what we're trying to do there is take all of the power of SharePoint, put it out on the internet, which may seem like a little bit overdone, but it's not. A lot of people are going to be wanting to have things like governance and publishing controls, for example. The other thing is they're going to want to be able to use these more visual type tools. So let me just give you a quick example here. And these are some of the SharePoint 2010 Insights web parts, for example. Okay, so this is a website in the United States. And it's from a school. Now, the surprising thing about this school is they publish a lot of their information internally. So we were talking about this ability to do things such as versioning. If you look at this, this is a stock standard sort of SharePoint style site. So obviously all of this content in here, I could version, I could have this controlled, I could have a governance process across this, and that's all fairly important to be able to have. And if you look at these, this would be, for example, a SharePoint style list. It's not part of the content. This would be a list of things that are wanting to be on the front page. However, the key bit is this. This is on their home page. They've got district data dashboards. So I can actually click on this, and suddenly they're trying to visualize a whole bunch of school indicators about how their operations are doing. This is, by the way, performance point services, which is built into SharePoint. So in other words, they're trying to graph things like economic gaps, ethnic gaps. In other words, the gaps between how well a particular racial type is doing. Now, personally, I'm not convinced they should be doing that. However, they are. And I guess what they're trying to do there is try to keep the gap very small. Now, the interesting part about this is all live data. This is live data out of their database, the school's district database. So if I click on high academic achievement, for example, and you can actually see it's graphing this. The interesting part about this is I can drill into it. Drill down to, gender. So I can do it based on male or female and drill into the data that I'm seeing, the chart that I'm seeing. So what you're able to see there is a gap, not a huge gap, but that is female, that's male. So they're slightly higher in terms of the placement passing scores. Placement, I think, is for the next grade up. I can filter it, I can pivot it, I can show the chart in a different way. Typically. Okay, so I'm not sure why that's not showing that. So in essence, what I'm trying to talk about here, primarily, is this ability to take some of the line of business data that we have and surface it up into the internet, surface it up to where people can actually see it. If you take, for example, the tax department, maybe they should be doing things like the amount of fraud that they have, the sort of reporting that they should be doing anyway, but that you can't see the data of. If you take any other organisation, banks and what have you, you could surface up the data out of a bank website, my website. I could see where I was spending money last week, last month, last year, etc. So let me come back to that for a moment and talk about the sorts of tools that we can use for this. So in essence, what I've got is a couple of things. One is Excel Web Access. So a moment ago, I was showing you performance point services. This is what Excel Web Access looks like as well. So you can take Excel workbooks, store them in SharePoint, have them be surfaced out onto the internet, and now I can actually visualize these. So in other words, people can create graphs of, for example, past performance that would be for an annual review, for example. Inside here, you're seeing, inside here you're also seeing another version of the Excel Web Services type information, as in it's appearing the same as an Excel workbook would. In essence, what we're looking at is this ability to take some of the information that we have and make it a lot more visual. This is where we're getting away from that really static style websites you would have seen in the past and moving them to the vastly newer style of being able to service a lot of the line of business data. So, the key question, I guess, is out of all the organizations here, I very much doubt that there's any of you that don't have a database. And if you have a database, you'll have data like this. And if you have data like this, maybe some of this data should be surfaced onto your website. Or maybe surfaced onto the website, but for specific users, so they can log in, for example. Okay, so that's talking about the data. Now let's talk briefly about what the style of the website is going to look like. So this is the Ferrari.com website. And I talked about the fact that this is building brands. So in this instance, what you're looking at is building a brand that is very well known, Ferrari. Now, you would expect Ferrari to have spent lots of money on this because people, the first thing that anybody is going to do when you're going to spend $1 million or $2 on a Ferrari is look at the website, check out the specs. You're going to want a feeling of quality out of this. This is a SharePoint website. Surprising, but it is. Another example of that is the Telstra Enterprise website. So Telstra run their enterprise website on SharePoint. So I think a lot of people probably think in terms of SharePoint just being internally, sharing documents around, being able to upload things. Not quite the case. This is a SharePoint site. I think if you take the Ferrari example, then yes, there's a very good case here for spending a reasonable amount of money to actually have people that know SharePoint very well to use this website, to create the branded experience that you want here. So in other words, to be able to create the vision exactly as it appears on here. These would be multiple web parts. This is not a default out-of-the-box presentation style, as you can imagine. But it's not all that hard either. It's no harder than doing it in any other web content management solution. The Telstra Enterprise website, that's a little bit more like a normal SharePoint one. You can see it doesn't look vastly different to a normal SharePoint style to it. You've got web parts down the bottom here, subscribe to newsletters, maybe some news, that sort of thing. It really doesn't look vastly different to an ordinary SharePoint website. Yet, Telstra running this as their primary website on enterprise, on the enterprise, on the internet. Okay, so there's a series of different shades of web content management. On the left-hand side here, you've got an enterprise wiki. Is anybody not running a wiki internally in their organization? Okay, that's well, personally for me, a little surprising. What I've seen is, having used wikis over the last 5 or 6 years, is they're a fantastic internal resource. The fact is that wikis are built into SharePoint 2010. So it's got a capability there for having really no governance over it. And this is the key thing, is that part of this many shades of web content management side is that there should be no governance over the entire model. In other words, on the left-hand side there, I can take content and anybody can change it, but I can track who changed it and when. So there's no governance over the changes, but there's still reporting over the changes and who made it. So you can sort of point at someone and say, yes, you shouldn't have updated that for whatever reason. But it means that people can fix problems on a website, because I don't know about you guys, but I've certainly seen problems on websites where there's misspellings or the information's wrong or can do with additional information. That's where wikis really shine. People can come along, know that it's wrong and fix it. So that's on the left-hand side, completely ungoverned effectively, but reported on. On the right-hand side, you've got very highly controlled publishing, structured content, pixel-perfect branding, very, very high governance over this as well. There's no way that something's going to go onto that website without the owner of the website being able to see what that change is going to look like before it actually goes there. So that's web content management. And in the middle there, you've got divisional portals and corporate intranets. So the internet is probably the most governed version of that. So we think of this in terms of A, B, C, and then U. Author and compose, brand it, be able to control it, have a unified platform. So A, B, C, author, brand, control, and then the whole thing is unified through the usual ribbon and SharePoint style there. And here's the ribbon effectively in action. So if you look up here, and I'm not sure how many of you haven't seen SharePoint yet, but this looks like a standard Word, Office, Visio, all of those sorts of tools. It's the standard sort of ribbon. And if you want to edit things such as video in here, or sorry, not edit, you can't actually edit video as in cut and splice video, but you can say, yes, this piece of video that's been delivered to me from an external agency, I can manage in here, add onto this website, dynamically show it in place of that image, for example. So you can manage those sorts of digital assets, images, video, audio, all those sorts of non-text style assets can be managed in here. And it's a very familiar, easy to use solution. In other words, there's very low training required. So there's the ribbon for media content, such as the top left there, the video that you can see, streaming content directly onto the web page, digital asset management. In other words, you can actually see the digital assets and the images that are required. If I click on something that says place a picture here, and I can structure these web pages very specifically, when I click on digital assets, it will show me only pictures. It won't show me audio and video. So it manages the assets for you. And then in terms of branding, we've got the add the box one, built-in themes that are about 5 minutes, custom themes, about 30 minutes, and then, yeah, to do something like Ferrari.com, that's going to be days or weeks, but that's normal for a website of that caliber. Okay, how do I control this? Well, if I'm trying to do a workflow of some form, in other words, if I'm going to say, here is a workflow that I want my page to go through before it actually appears on the internet, I can design that in Visio. And then I can upload that flow into SharePoint and say, this is the flow that I'm going to use. In other words, this is how I create the governance. And anybody can create this. So I've got Visio, I create a governance model for how this page is going to be managed, and away it goes. Interestingly, I was in India probably about a month ago now. While I was there, they had very little governance. They didn't use SharePoint on their internet site. They had a very simplistic HTML style model. And what happened is, if you look at this part where it's saying, is SEO data, so search engine optimization data, present? In other words, does it have keyword tags and meta tags and things like that? If it's no, then you add note to the approval email, etc. But what these guys had is the title of the website. So the page looked fine. But if you looked at the title in the title bar in the browser, it was I love you. Someone hadn't changed the title. They'd sort of messed around with it. And of course, someone had looked at the whole page and gone, yep, this looks fine, because the page itself looked fine. But the title on the web page itself, yeah, completely inappropriate for a government website. And that was just one example. They had a whole series of other ones where the interior data just wasn't correct because they didn't have a proper governance model. So the fact that SharePoint allows you to do that, very important. I can control things via the workflows, import from Visio, export flows to Visio, reuse them. And then we can add on the insight that I was talking about, those charts that I was showing you a moment ago on the other website. Web analytics, social analytics, health monitoring, so it's SCOM integrated. I can actually see that not just the machine that SharePoint's running on is okay, but that SharePoint itself is okay. Not too many users, not too much usage, etc. And lastly, it's a completely unified platform. So in terms of digital marketing, if you go into the marketing department and say, hey, we've got this one platform, it's really easy to use, here's all the governance models, here's how you guys can manage and maintain that, and by the way, we can make it look really slick, the marketing guys go, hey, that's fantastic, I can build that into my marketing plan very easily. So that's where you get this digital marketing concept. We're building the marketing of that, and then you can go and talk about ads and what have you later, but that's the core of it, is how do I get the content out there. And by the way, it also complies with the web accessibility standards. So it's something to look out for, is you really want to target those standards to be able to make it web accessible for people that are lesser abled. Okay, so I'm going to talk about fast search for internet sites. But before I do that, I'm going to go to bestbuy.com. Okay, so bestbuy.com has 20% of the I've switched from SharePoint now to fast search for internet sites. So fast search for internet sites is a completely different product, doesn't come with SharePoint. And I'm using this as a bit of an example about just how data within a major website is managed and surfaced and searched for. So bestbuy.com is probably the equivalent of sort of like a Kmart or something like that, but in the United States, but squarely on electronics. They do something along the lines of 20% of the total volume of US electronic sales, which amounts to about $50 billion a year. So, and you can see that search is one of the key things. Search, oddly, is on most websites. So if I type in notebook, so what I'm looking for here is actually a laptop. So even though I typed in notebook, so this is search related. As I mentioned, something between 25 to 30% of people will end up doing a search. I typed in notebook, but it knew that a notebook and a laptop was the same thing. So this is what's called synonyms. This is actually a very easy thing. It was built into the original FAST. So a couple of extra things that are in here as well. What are called refinements. So in other words, I have a series of laptops down here. And if I sort of counted all these up, I've probably got a couple of hundred laptops, but it's not bothering to show me that. Nobody really wants to see a list of a couple of hundred laptops. What they want to see instead, or what Best Buy wants you to see, is this sort of thing. Laptops, MacBooks, netbooks start to make you go through the process of working out what sort of laptop you want. Choose by type, back to school, compare them, those sorts of things. The interesting is if I type in D830, a completely different search. This is searching for this model of machine. Now I get something that looks like an ordinary search result. This looks like a very normal one. So the interesting part about this, in essence, is that's the sort of search you would expect out of something like Bing. Okay, it looks just like two search results out of an ordinary search result type. Let me go back to Notebook again. Again, it does the laptop equivalent. But I can drill down by brand. So I can say, well, I definitely want a Samsung type one or an Alienware one. Alienware make really hot, fast machines. Great, let's have a look at those. So now I get something that looks like an ordinary search result. So that's one of the interesting parts here. These drill downs enable me to do things like click on price ranges. There's only two in the low price range, many more in the higher price range. Different screen sizes, for example. So when I'm looking for things, let's imagine I'm looking for houses. If I'm looking for houses, I can say, well, I want a 3-bedroom house. I want it to have 1 bathroom or 2 bathrooms. That sort of question mark, I guess. This is part of digital marketing as well, because a lot of people are going to want to do this sort of search as part of their request. So if I go back to the example of the school website, maybe I want to type in the school results for a particular school name. They haven't got that search enabled on there, but you can now search through BI-related information as part of this. But you can imagine that that's what people would want to do. I would not know on this website how to find a single individual schools. But what you would really love is a little search box up here. And that's what people tend to find. As part of digital marketing is the ability to have a search box there that people can just type things into and then find what they want, find what they're actually interested in. Okay, So if I drill down into one of these, you can actually see there's a whole series of bits of information, which let's say we've typed those into SharePoint. But on top of that, there's specifications, there's accessories, there's customer reviews. So there's 5-star customer reviews in here, which is kind of interesting. How did they get hold of those customer reviews and how did they know? Well, that's easy. They count up the number of stars that the customer gave it. But what happens if I want to write a review and I actually mention other products in here? Well, what I can do as part of the Fast Search for Internet product is process the text, which I'll come to in a moment. But you can see there's lots of different bits of data that are actually brought together to make this single page. There's the overview information, there's the spec data that have come out of a database, there's the accessories, which is from some other part of so this would be out of a database just describing the product. These are out of related products. So this is a different database table completely. Customer reviews, all textual data, completely separate again. So what we're trying to do is bring all this data together in one place. So here's Fast Search for Internet sites. So in the middle here is what Microsoft spent all the money on. That's the original product. At the top here is a design surface, and you can see that it allows you to create these flows where I can take data from the left-hand side, process it in here, and then eventually write it out to the index. Now the interesting thing is I don't have to write it out to the index. By index, I'm talking about a search index there. So a simple example of that is if I go to Best Buy and I type in, notebook. I misspelled notebook. So now it's still looking for things like laptops and what have you. It's still found things. So there is nothing called a notebook, but it still found things because it found the closest thing to it, which was notebook. So all of this is functionality that's built into ESP. Synonyms, lemmatization, fuzzy search, which you just saw vaguely part of, spell checking, the ability to do the refinements on the left-hand side. A whole lot of functionality is all in that center box. Over here, when I was talking about the Visual Designer, however, you don't need to put the data into the search index. What you can do is process it and then put it back into the database. So in other words, when I'm creating this data that goes to make up that web page I saw a moment ago, which was the detail of this, I'm getting this information from a variety of places. Oops. So there's all the information there. There's even an editorial review from CNET. So in other words, it's gone to CNET where they won't have given it a star rating. And what's more, they won't have said, here is the exact product. And what they will have done is worked out that here is a Toshiba satellite laptop. Big question is, how do they do it? CNET won't have tried to link into the Best Buy database. That's just not what they do. Simple. When the data was coming in, the content was coming in from the right-hand side, it went through a series of engines. It actually looked for words like Toshiba and said, that's a make. It looked for other words like satellite, said that's a model. Laptop, okay, it's a type of thing, not digital camera, not something else. It's looking for the text in this keyword here. It would be looking for things like 2 GB and saying, that's probably memory. It's looking for things like 15-inch display, 15.6-inch display, and saying that's the display size. So these are key things that it looks for in terms of the text itself. That's the content transformation engine, which is this part here. So in other words, we take the content, we transform it, we merge it together into the database, we put it into the index, or we put it back into the database, and then eventually we have the interaction management side as well. So when I do a search, if I type in, as I said, special offers, I want to have a completely different flow in here. So let me just drill into that a little bit more. Oh, sorry. And then lastly, you've got the Search Business Manager. So in other words, on the web page itself, I could say, right, this is what my web page normally looks like, but maybe 1 in 100 people will have an extra link up here that says buy now because I'm testing that link. But it's only 1 in 100. I want every single person to see it because that makes it too difficult to see whether it's just going to tick people off. So if I put it here on 1 in 100 people, it's this idea of A/B testing. So everybody receives the A page except for the 1 in 100 receives the B page where it has a slight change. And if people start to use that feature, I can then say, okay, the feature worked. I'll promote that one onto the A page. And you can actually be testing a number of these B features all at once. So this concept of A/B testing down here allows me to set up about, say, 5 or 6 different versions of the page with different new features and then be testing those to see which ones seem to work with customers. That's what the Search Business Manager does. So this is what the Best Buy website looks like right now. There's a whole series of different websites. It's difficult and complex to update, maintain, and what have you. So what they were able to do as part of the POC was drag all of the data into one place using this visual tool. And that was key for them, to be able to do this quickly, because as I mentioned, if you think about the way that people had to go in the old days to the IT shop and say, oh, I just need you to make a couple of changes here, it can take ages. It actually prevents people from making the change. They're like, oh, it's too difficult to make a two-word change, we won't worry about it. You need this to be fast, to be able to drag in more information, maybe from Wikipedia, and add that onto the Best Buy website. So that was one of the core parts they wanted to be able to do on here as well, on the Best Buy website. So here's some of the things that FSIS can make happen. There's about 12 items on here, and realistically, even at 1 minute each, I just wouldn't be able to get through them rapidly enough. So, federation, however. Federation is a slightly different concept. This is where I take the information, the search results, and what I do is I pull that dynamically from an external website. So in other words, if there's CNET and it has news that's right now, I will pull that from that website immediately, rather than at a later date. The location-based search maybe is able to give me the flexibility that if I'm in a specific location, I'm searching for things from Best Buy, I can actually look at it from a specific place, a specific location, from where I'm standing right now. I'm at home, I can do an IP address lookup and say, yep, here's my nearest Best Buy store, for example. Promotions and cross-sell and recommendations. So in other words, if you think about the Best Buy website, over here, what we were able to say is, here's some accessories. These things are sold with the main item. This idea of being able to recommend products, and say these seem to be sold together, is another feature that FSIS can offer. So CTS essentially extends the original enterprise search platform, ESP. It adds on content indexing, the CTS engine, content distributor, and so forth. IMS is the interaction management. That's the whole special offer one. Special offers goes up here, and down here you might have the normal, I'm searching for a D830 or a model number. And as part of that, you've got the business manager over the top of it. So this is the interaction management side. Okay, that, very briefly, was FSIS. I'm going to touch quickly on the SharePoint personalization accelerator. So this is the SharePoint personalization accelerator. Essentially what we're trying to do here is create a more personalized version of the craft.com website. In other words, here's the Kraft Food website. Here's a SharePoint version of the same thing. You can see they look relatively similar. However, what I want to be able to do here is if I start clicking on certain pieces of information, if I say I'm clicking on diabetes, I'm clicking on kids recipes, I'm clicking on things along those lines, what I'd like it to be able to do is to populate parts of the result the next time I come back to the Kraft Food website with information that's personalized to me. So in other words, this week I go in here and I'm looking for kid-related recipes. Next week I come back and it will pop those up in this right-hand section. In other words, it will try and personalize the website for me. The personalization accelerator is able to do those sorts of things for you. And this is very broadly how it works. In essence, you get a series of web parts, you add those to the home page. Every time people click on things, it tracks the event, builds a profile of a user, and then builds a search index. So a quick example of that. If I do a very simple Bing search, and let's imagine the tags that it was tracking were things like recipe, children, diabetes. So in other words, as I clicked around pages that refer to those, it's done a search across the content that I have. Recipe exchange, children with diabetes. So this is kind of how the search engine works. This is what I'm looking at the personalization accelerator doing for me, is to search across all the content that I have and find things that are relevant. So the next time I come back to that home page, this is the sort of thing that I would see, potentially from Bing, potentially from my internal content. So in other words, back here, now this is what I see. I see kid-approved recipes, for example, for diabetes. So this is different from the original web page that I saw. That's the original web page. There's the new web page with things such as kid-approved recipes, 2-for-1 special that are specific to children, those sorts of things. Now available with less fat. So you can see that whole Kraft Food website changes its behavior based on its personalization to me. That's the personalization accelerator, and that's the sort of thing that it can do for you. Okay, and last but not least, Xbox.com. So if you think of Xbox.com, which is this, This is a sort of standard Xbox.com. Oh, sorry, this is what Xbox.com could look like. So if I do a quick search and say, okay, who's playing Netflix? And I haven't logged in yet. And say, all right, I'm searching for the keyword Netflix. And the idea here is that I'm trying to bring all this data together using FSIS. So there's a series of people that are watching Netflix. So let me log in. Samsonot. So now I've logged in as me. Whoops. So this is me, Samsonot. I'm able to do things like check on my games, check on my friends, for example. But it knows that I watch video mostly. I'm not a real gamer. I'm watching video instead. So the interesting part here is I'm getting invites down the bottom here. So Katie Vig sent me an invite. So let's have a look at that. And by the way, that's Katie Vig there. I can check on his profile. I can see my account. Let's check on the invite that I got. So it says, oh, let's allow you to see a Netflix movie. Now, this is servicing data, and this is, by the way, a demo, but would be servicing data out of a search index, not out of a database. And the key reason for that is I want to be able to do fuzzy search for finding people that aren't just friends, but maybe friends of friends and that sort of thing. Plus, I want to be able to do things like search in French, search in Spanish. So in this instance, I don't have enough credits. So what I'll have to do is review my account. So when I review my account, here's a series of bits of information, which if you think about the bestbuy.com refinement data down the left-hand side there, these parts, these are like those numbers that you're seeing. If I graphed these, it would look a little bit like the bar graphs. So in other words, if I had 2 dots, 6 dots, etc., it would look a little bit like, the bar graph that I'm seeing here. So in other words, what I want to be able to do is surface this out of the search engine. And over here, what I want to be able to do is find the packages that are likely to sell for this person and have the search engine do that for me and propose these to. Problem is, in this case, I'm not interested in that. I want different packages. So what I'll do is do a search for how I can buy credits. You'll see this information down the bottom here now changed. Where do I get cheap Microsoft points? That's the one I want to click on. That's what I want to be able to do. And if I log out and log back in as Katie Vig, you can see this guy's a hardcore gamer. And he's got the same sort of functionality, and here's his friend Samsonot. But if I type in Mass Effect and I mistype it, I can still see the game. I can still see the data down here. And there is a piece of information that is forum information that's been brought in. So I'm pulling data off a forum where it talks about Mass Effect or Mass Effect 2 and bringing it in and saying, this is the number of forum articles I saw that mention Mass Effect or Mass Effect 2 over a timeline. And that's with that content transformation services. And this is the key thing, being able to pull all that data into one location, be able to use it. That's an example of what FSIS can do for you. So, that's the end of that part. This is about software assurance. In essence, we've got planning services, a whole series of things. Not a lot of people are aware of this, but in essence, whenever you buy an enterprise agreement, and a number of you perhaps already have that, you're entitled to free days from Microsoft staff to help you engage and implement some of that. So just be aware that software assurance is key, and there are facilities there to be able to help you be able to deploy the software that you purchased or that you have rights to use. So there's a few next steps: volume licensing centers, product lists, locate partners. Microsoft does a lot of work through partners, so we would suggest that, in essence, your best approach for any of these, the things that I've talked about, is to go through a partner, start to talk to them, start to get them engaged. And questions? Yep.
Can you do the personalisation without FAST, just with standard SharePoint enterprise?
Yes. So the personalisation accelerator that I can try and go back to absolutely works without FAST. So this one is a set of personalisation web parts that use primarily a database to do the... Oh, sorry, wait a minute. No. However, sorry. My guess? No. You would have to use FAST with it. Sorry, and the reason why I said that first thing is that someone had mentioned that you were able to do it. So I think that's one for me to come back to you on. But as far as I know, yes, it's been implemented with FAST. Other questions? Right, okay, thank you. That was it. That was fast and the digital marketing platform, primarily SharePoint. Thank you.